Today, we're diving into one of the most brilliant and, honestly, dangerous acts of political criticism in history. And no, it's not about some secret plot or a revolution. It's about an adventure novel, a 17th century bestseller that was secretly a complete takedown of the most powerful man in the world at the time, King Louis XIV. So, let's get into how he pulled it off. I mean, really think about this for a second. Picture it. It's the late 1600s in France. The king is an absolute monarch. They call him the Sun King. And even one wrong word can get you locked up in the Bastille for good. So, how do you tell that guy that he's vain, a warmonger, and a pretty terrible ruler? How do you even begin to get that message across without, losing your head?
You do it in the most genius way imaginable. You disguise it as a textbook for his heir. And that is exactly what this guy, François Fenelon, did with his book, The Adventures of Telemachus. On the surface, it was just an adventure story to educate the king's grandson. But hidden inside every page was a scathing critique of the king himself.
And here are the players in our little drama. First, you've got Fenelon, the author and tutor who's on a secret mission. Then you have his student, the young duke, who is basically being trained to be a totally new kind of king. And of course, the target, King Louis XIV, the man whose entire legacy is about to get systematically torn apart, right under his own nose.
Now, Fenelon wasn't just writing this in a vacuum. The late 17th century was a time of massive intellectual change. One historian called it the crisis of European conscience. All the old certainties were starting to crumble. You had thinkers like Descartes championing reason over tradition, and after the king made some really disastrous political moves, criticism was just bubbling right beneath the surface. Fenelon's book landed like a perfectly timed bomb.
All right, so how did he actually do it? Well, first things first, Fenelon had to tear down the image of the king to make room for a new one. This was the deconstruction phase. So let's decode some of his secret attacks on Louis XIV.
Okay, so you read this quote, and it just seems like a pretty standard piece of moral advice, right? A little old-fashioned maybe, but harmless. But to anyone in the French court at the time, this was an incredibly specific and vicious insult.
And that right there shows you Fenelon's method. Louis XIV was famous for his high heels, his giant wigs, all the ribbons and powders. So by writing this, Fenelon was basically telling the future king, hey, whatever you do, don't be like your vain, ridiculous grandfather. It was a devastatingly personal attack, hidden in plain sight.
But it went way beyond fashion. Fenelon took aim at the very pillars of Louis's reign. Where Louis saw himself as having absolute, God-given power, Fenelon argued for the rule of law. Where the court celebrated this decadent, over-the-top luxury, Fenelon praised a simple life. And where Louis glorified war and conquest, Fenelon promoted science and education.
Let's just pause on this one line for a minute, because, wow. In an age where the king famously said, "L'État c'est moi," I am the state, this statement is nothing short of revolutionary. It's a complete flip of the entire political order.
So what's really crucial to get here is that this wasn't just a suggestion for better behavior. This was an argument that the king himself, the Sun King, was not above the law, that he should have to answer to reason and justice just like everybody else. This idea would become the bedrock of the Enlightenment, but here it is in 1699 in a book written for a 12-year-old boy. Incredible.
So, after tearing down the old model of a king, Fenelon couldn't just leave a void. His second mission was constructive, to lay out a clear blueprint for what a good, just, and virtuous king should actually be.
Now, you got to understand, Fenelon wasn't trying to spark the French Revolution or anything. He actually believed in the monarchy, but he wanted to reform it. He wanted to transform it from a dictatorship that ran on the whims of one man into a just system, managed by law and led by a truly enlightened ruler.
And here is his guide, and it's incredibly practical. He tells the young prince to be a shrewd judge of character, to avoid the poison of flattery at all costs, and to stay connected to the real world by understanding what life is like for ordinary people. And at the heart of it all are those two radical ideas. Submit your own power to the law and focus on educating your people to build a better future.
This quote, this gets to the heart of a huge problem for any leader, even today. Fenelon is warning that telling the truth, real virtue, can seem harsh or disloyal to insecure rulers. So what do? They surround themselves with flatterers, with yes-men, who just tell them what they want to hear. And that leads them further and further into ruin. It's a timeless warning about the danger of living in a bubble.
And Fenelon's idea of virtue is so important here. For him, it wasn't some abstract, preachy concept. It was a practical toolkit for good government. He believed that if a leader practiced actual justice, sincerity, and moderation, people would naturally want to follow them. Virtue wasn't just about being a good person, it was about being an effective and beloved leader.
So a tutor writes a textbook for his student. Why does this one book matter so much hundreds of years later? Well, because its ideas didn't stay locked away in the classroom. They escaped, and they helped ignite one of the most significant intellectual movements in all of human history. The Adventures of Telemachus was basically a direct bridge to the Enlightenment. These core principles you're looking at, reason, the rule of law, the critique of absolute authority, the power of education, these became the foundational ideas for the next generation of thinkers who would literally change the world. Fenelon laid all the groundwork.
And that's what it all comes down to, isn't it? One book, a secret message written for one student, was all it took to plant an idea that would grow and eventually reshape the world.
This was Fenelon's final instruction to the young prince. True glory, he was arguing, wasn't about conquering new lands or building fancy palaces. It was about creating a just, prosperous, and enlightened society for your people. A new golden age, built on virtue and reason.
And so we're left with this question, which is just as relevant today as it was back in 1699. Fenelon, he had his answer: humility, a commitment to justice, and the wisdom to listen to the hard truth instead of easy flattery. But it's a question every single generation has to answer for itself. What do you think?